The quantum sensors screamed their warnings across the Galactic Council's monitoring station, orbiting Kepler 442b. Something massive had just torn through hyperspace. Something that shouldn't exist. Admiral Vexithara of the Catherian Empire pressed her four-fingered hand against the holographic display, her scaled features contorting with disbelief. The energy signature was impossible, a vessel nearly 3 kilometers long, radiating power levels that dwarfed their most advanced dreadnoughts. "Run the signature through the archives," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "Cross-reference with extinct species databases." The artificial intelligence, a crystalline construct called Omnex, flickered to life. "Match found, Admiral. Terran Empire. Classification, dead civilization, last recorded activity. 9,847 standard cycles ago." The bridge fell silent. Every species in the galaxy knew the legend of Terra, the small blue world whose inhabitants had launched themselves into the void with primitive chemical rockets and dreams of greatness, only to vanish without a trace. Their homeworld had been glassed by the hegemony wars millennia ago, their colonies scattered to cosmic dust. "That's impossible," whispered Navigation Officer Quilex, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. The Terrans were barely sapient when they disappeared. Stone knives and bearskins. But the massive vessel now decelerating toward the galactic core told a different story. Its hull gleamed with an otherworldly metal that seemed to absorb and redirect scanning beams. Weapon ports the size of city blocks dotted its surface, and energy readings suggested power generation capabilities that violated several known laws of physics. "Admiral," Omnex's voice carried an unusual tremor, something that should have been impossible for an AI. "I'm detecting organic life signs aboard the vessel. Approximately 50,000 individuals. They're human." Vexithara's blood ran cold. The Terrans hadn't just survived. They had evolved beyond recognition. As the massive ship continued its inexorable approach, automated systems began transmitting on frequencies the galaxy hadn't heard. "In 10,000 years, citizens of the galaxy," the transmission began, the voice carrying an accent lost to time. "This is Captain Orinthius Caney of the Earth vessel Revenant's Edge. We have returned to collect what was stolen from us." The holographic display updated with tactical information that made Vexithara's heart skip several beats. The human ship wasn't just approaching, it was systematically mapping every defense platform, every fleet position, every weakness in the sector's protective grid. Whatever the Terrans had become during their long exile, they had learned to wage war on a scale that made the galaxy's current conflicts look like children's games. "Send word to the High Council," Vexithara ordered, her voice barely steady. "Tell them the Terrans have returned, and tell them to pray to whatever gods they worship that these humans remember mercy." As if responding to her thoughts, the Revenant's Edge began deploying smaller vessels, sleek predatory shapes that moved through space like living things. Each one radiated enough firepower to crack a moon. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had once been feared. The emergency session of the Galactic High Council convened within 6 hours, a record that spoke to the sheer terror the human vessel had inspired across known space. Representatives from 47 different species filled the great amphitheater on Nexus Prime, their varied forms united only by shared dread. Counselor Prime Ethakmore, an ancient being whose crystalline body had witnessed the rise of 13 galactic civilizations, called for order with a harmonic resonance that vibrated through every translator in the chamber. "The humans have made no aggressive moves beyond their initial deployment," reported Intelligence Chief Velandra, her insectoid features clicking with nervous energy. "However, their scanning activities suggest they're cataloging our military capabilities with disturbing precision." "What do they want?" demanded Representative Korthul of the hegemonic worlds, his bulk shifting nervously on the reinforced platform designed to hold his silicon-based form. Their message spoke of collecting what was stolen. What could we possibly have taken from a species that barely achieved interstellar flight? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. HFY, the Council's chief xenoarchaeologist, had been studying Terran ruins for decades. Her pale, ethereal form materialized at the speaker's podium, her photosynthetic skin flickering with patterns of distress. "The Terran colonies," she said simply. "When the hegemony wars began 9 millennia ago, 17 human settlements were incorporated into other species' territories. The populations were enslaved, their genetic material harvested, their technology reverse-engineered. We told ourselves they were primitives, that their brief existence was inconsequential." A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The implications were staggering. "You're suggesting," Counselor Prime Ythakmore's harmonics took on a dangerous judace, "that these humans have spent 9,000 years tracking down their lost colonies?" "Not just tracking," HFY replied, her form brightening with fear. "Evolving, adapting, learning. The energy signatures from their vessel suggest they've mastered technologies we've never even theorized. And the genetic scans." She paused, her patterns shifting to colors that had no names in most languages. "They're not entirely human anymore." The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Across the galaxy, 47 different species suddenly realized they might be facing something far worse than conquerors. They were facing justice, delivered by beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of retribution. Captain Orinthius, Kaney's second transmission arrived as if summoned by their discussion. This time, the message was accompanied by holographic projections that made several council members physically recoil. "We know you remember us." Kaney's voice carried harmonics impossible for baseline humans to produce. "We know you remember the colonies at Kepler 62e, where the Vorthak Collective harvested our children for their genetic experiments. We remember Glisa 667cc, where the Eternal Dynasty worked our people to death in their lithium mines. We remember all of it." The projections showed star maps with 17 systems highlighted in crimson. Every location corresponded to a former Terran colony, now thriving worlds under the control of various galactic powers. "We offer one opportunity for peaceful resolution," Kaney continued. "Return what belongs to us. Restore what was taken. Make amends for 9,000 years of theft and murder. You have 72 hours to respond." The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. Finally, Representative Korthul spoke the thought that lurked in every mind. What happens if we refuse? The answer came from Admiral Vexithara's urgent communication from the monitoring station. "The human vessel just split into 7 sections. Each section is heading toward a different system. They're not waiting for our answer. They're going to take what they came for." The first system to experience humanity's return was Kepler 62e, now called Velthara Prime by its current inhabitants, the Crystalline Collective. For 8,000 years, they had built their civilization on the bones of human settlements, their semi-aquatic cities rising from the same oceans where Terran colonists had once fished and farmed. The section of Revenant's edge that approached, their world was smaller than the original vessel, but still dwarfed their entire defense fleet. As it entered the system's outer rim, something unprecedented occurred. It began to sing. The harmonic resonance penetrated every crystal-based communication network on the planet, carrying with it fragments of memory that shouldn't have existed. The collective experienced flashes of human consciousness, children laughing in hydroponic gardens, families gathered around dinner tables, lovers walking hand in hand through transparent domes that protected them from the planet's harsh atmosphere. But these weren't just memories, they were accusations. Commander Rixulai of the Planetary Defense Force felt her crystalline matrix fracture as the true weight of her species' crimes became clear. The humans hadn't simply been killed or enslaved. They had been harvested, their consciousness patterns stored and studied, their genetic material used to enhance the collective's own reproduction cycles. "Incoming transmission from the human vessel," her communications officer reported, though the words were unnecessary. Every being on the planet could feel the message resonating through their shared consciousness. "Citizens of Velthara Prime." The voice belonged to Captain Kaney, but it carried undertones of thousands of other voices, human voices, speaking in languages that had been dead for millennia. You have built your paradise on our graves. You have fed your children with nutrients extracted from our bones. You have lived for 8,000 years on stolen time. The human vessel began deploying landing craft, but these weren't the crude shuttles the collective had expected. Instead, sleek constructs that seemed to phase between matter and energy descended toward the planet's surface. Each craft carried beings that registered on scanners as human, but their biosignatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The first landing occurred at the site of New Geneva, the original human settlement. What emerged from the craft made Commander HFY's matrix nearly shatter with incomprehension. The beings were humanoid, but their skin held depths that seemed to contain starlight. Their eyes reflected colors that didn't exist in normal space-time. And when they moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around them. They began to sing, the same harmonic resonance that had penetrated the planet's networks, but now focused and directed. The crystalline structures of the nearest collective city began to resonate in response, and something impossible happened. They began to remember. The buildings themselves started displaying holographic echoes of their past, human families living their daily lives, researchers working in laboratories, children playing in parks that had been paved over millennia ago. The very stones cried out with the voices of the dead. "We are the reclaimed," spoke the leader of the human landing force, her voice carrying harmonics that made the planet's atmosphere itself vibrate. "We are the echo of every life you stole, the memory of every dream you murdered. We have returned, not for vengeance, but for restoration." As she spoke, the other humans began performing actions that defied understanding. They touched the ground and plants began to grow, but not ordinary vegetation. These were Terran flora, genetically reconstructed. From quantum memories embedded in the planet's core, gardens that had been extinct for 8,000 years bloomed in minutes, their growth accelerated by technologies that made photosynthesis look primitive. Commander HFY realized with growing horror that the humans weren't here to destroy the collective civilization. They were here to replace it entirely, rebuilding their own world from the molecular level up, and somehow, they had the power to make the planet itself cooperate with their vision. The transformation of Kepler-62e had begun, and across 6 other systems, similar scenes were playing out as humanity's children came home to reclaim what had always been theirs. In the hegemonic capital system of Dominion Prime, War Marshal Krexthul received reports from 6 different battlefronts simultaneously, each one more impossible than the last. His massive form, evolved for warfare across a dozen different gravity wells, trembled with rage as tactical displays showed the systematic dissolution of hegemonic power. "They're not fighting us," reported combat analyst Yex Mira, her cybernetic, implants glowing with processing strain. "They're rewriting us." The holographic displays showed scenes that violated every known principle of conquest. On Gliese 667cc, the mining world where humans had once been worked to death, the returning Terrans hadn't engaged the hegemonic fleet at all. Instead, they had somehow convinced the planet's core to stop producing the exotic minerals that powered the entire sector's economy. Mining equipment worth trillions of credits simply ceased to function, while the planet's surface began transforming into something resembling pre-war Earth. "Explain to me," Krexthul growled, his voice carrying subsonic frequencies that made the bridge crew's bones ache. "How primitives with barely functional rocket technology have somehow developed the ability to reprogram matter at the quantum level." The answer came from an unexpected source. Exile scholar Neth Gorin, a hegemonic scientist who had been banished for studying forbidden technologies. His scarred form materialized via emergency hologram, speaking from whatever distant research station he now called home. "War Marshal, you're approaching this from the wrong perspective." Neth Gorin's image flickered with transmission lag. "The humans didn't develop these abilities despite their primitive technology. They developed them because of it. While we perfected weapons of destruction, they perfected adaptation. While we conquered space, they learned to become one with it." Krexthul's primary weapons array instinctively targeted the hologram, a reflexive response to information that threatened his understanding of reality. Explain. The humans were nomads, War Marshal. When they fled Earth, they didn't just travel between stars, they lived between them. For 9,000 years they existed in the void, learning to survive in environments that would kill any of our species. In seconds, they didn't just adapt to space, they evolved into something that could remake space in their image. The tactical displays updated with new intelligence that made Krexthul's blood run cold. The human vessels weren't using conventional faster-than-light travel. They were folding space-time around themselves, moving through dimensions that the hegemony scientists insisted didn't exist. More disturbing still, they appeared to be communicating instantaneously across impossible distances, coordinating their 7 separate campaigns as if they were a single organism. "Sir," Yexmira's voice carried a tremor that she couldn't quite suppress. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. It's addressed to you, personally." The image that materialized was of Captain Arinthius Caney, but the being who looked back at Krexthul bore only superficial resemblance to the baseline humans in the hegemony's historical databases. His skin seemed to contain depths that suggested access to higher dimensions, and his eyes held the weight of cosmic time. "War Marshal Krexthul," Caney's voice carried harmonics that penetrated Krexthul's mental defenses, speaking directly to his consciousness. "Your species enslaved our miners on Glisa 600-67 CC. You worked them until their hands bled, then harvested their organs for your medical experiments. You bred our people like livestock to provide enhanced soldiers for your endless wars." Each accusation came with vivid sensory data, memories extracted from quantum echoes embedded in the planets themselves. Krexthul experienced firsthand the suffering his ancestors had inflicted, feeling the pain and desperation of humans who had died millennia before his own birth. "But we offer you something your species has never understood," Caney continued. "We offer you the chance to evolve beyond your addiction to conquest. Surrender the stolen worlds. Allow us to restore what was taken. Join us in building something greater than empire." The transmission ended, leaving Krexthul with a choice that would determine the fate of his entire species. Around him, his command staff waited for orders that would either begin the greatest war in galactic history or forge an alliance that could transform the very nature of civilization itself. The War Marshal's decision would reshape the galaxy. Dr. Eilith Van, formerly human, now something far more complex, stood in the quantum laboratory aboard Revenant's Edge, her consciousness simultaneously present in 7 different star systems. Through her enhanced perception, she could feel the molecular structure of entire worlds reshaping themselves, according to patterns embedded in humanity's genetic memory. The transformation wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. It was archaeology, conducted at the quantum level, using technologies that had evolved from humanity's desperate need to survive in the void between stars. Over 9 millennia of existence in deep space, humans had learned to read the quantum signatures left by conscious beings, to extract memories from subatomic particles, and to convince matter itself to remember better configurations. "Status report," she requested. Though communication among the reclaimed was more akin to shared consciousness than spoken language, the responses came from her counterparts on 6 other vessels. Kepler 62e was 34% restored to its pre-colonization state, with the crystalline collective's cities being gradually convinced to adopt more sustainable geometries. Surprisingly, many of the collective's members were volunteering to participate in the transformation, their crystalline matrices resonating with harmonic patterns that spoke to something deeper than species loyalty. Glisa 606N7 CC had ceased all mining operations, not through force but through the planet's core, simply refusing to produce the materials that had been extracted through human suffering. The hegemonic overseers found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning, while Terran flora began emerging from mine shafts that had been sealed for millennia. But the most significant development was occurring on Wolf 1061c, where humanity's Agricultural colonies had once fed 3 different alien civilizations before being consumed in resource wars. The returning humans hadn't simply reclaimed the farming settlements. They had begun teaching the current inhabitants, a species called the HFY, how to cultivate food without depleting their world's biosphere. The HFY are requesting full integration protocols, reported her counterpart from Wolf 1061C. They want to undergo the same evolutionary process we experienced in the void. This was unprecedented. The reclaimed had expected resistance, warfare, perhaps negotiated surrenders. They hadn't anticipated alien species actively seeking to join their transformation. Captain Kane's consciousness touched Ilith's through the quantum link they all shared. The Galactic Council is requesting a direct meeting. Admiral Vex Thara has offered to serve as mediator. She seems to understand what we've become. Ilith accessed the historical databases that existed in her enhanced memory. Vex Thara was old even by galactic standards, had witnessed the rise and fall of multiple civilizations, and had been present during the original hegemony wars that scattered humanity across the stars. More importantly, her species, the Catherians, were among the few that had never participated in the exploitation of human colonies. Acceptable, Ilith responded, but the meeting takes place on neutral territory, and we bring representatives from the species that have chosen to join us. As she formulated their response, Ilith felt a familiar presence touch her consciousness. Not one of the reclaimed, but something older, more fundamental. It was the quantum echo of Earth itself, somehow transmitted across 9,000 years, through the collective memory of humanity's children. The message was simple but profound. Remember what you were fighting for. Remember what made you human. Through the shared link, all the reclaimed paused in their activities. They had become so focused on restoration and transformation that they had nearly forgotten the original purpose of their return. Not to reclaim territory or exact revenge, but to ensure that no species would ever again face the annihilation that humanity had endured. Prepare a new transmission to the Galactic Council, Ilith instructed, and make it clear that our offer of transformation extends to any species that wishes to evolve beyond the cycles of conquest and exploitation that have defined galactic civilization for too long. The reclaimed were no longer simply returning home. They were offering to help the entire galaxy become something it had never been before, a true community of species working together rather than competing for dominance. But first, they had to survive the meeting with powers that still viewed the universe through the lens of territory and control. The neutral meeting ground chosen for the historic conference was an ancient space station known as Haven's Rest, constructed by a long-extinct species in the galactic rim. Its halls had witnessed the signing of treaties that ended system-wide wars and the formation of alliances that had shaped interstellar politics for millennia. Admiral Vex Thara arrived first, her ship's sensors detecting quantum disturbances that suggested the humans were already present, despite showing no conventional signatures. The Revenant's edge materialized slowly, its hull seeming to condense out of space itself, rather than dropping from hyperspace. The delegation that emerged from the human vessel challenged every assumption the galaxy had made about Earth's children. Captain Orinthius Caney led the group, but he was accompanied by beings that represented something entirely new. HFY, who had undergone the human transformation process, their bark-like skin now glowing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of quantum-level modifications. Crystalline collective members whose matrices had been restructured to channel harmonics that could reshape matter. Even a few former hegemonic soldiers whose war forms had been adapted for creation rather than destruction. This is what you offer? War Marshal Krexthal's voice carried through the station's corridors, his massive form having required structural modifications to accommodate his presence. A surrender of species identity in exchange for what? The ability to sing planets into submission? Captain Caney's response came not just in words, but in direct consciousness transfer, a technology that should have been impossible, but which the assembled delegates found themselves experiencing without discomfort. For a moment, Each representative felt what it was like to exist in the void between stars, to feel the quantum heartbeat of the universe, to understand that matter and energy were simply different expressions of consciousness itself. "We offer evolution," Caney said simply. "Not the abandonment of what you are, but the expansion of what you could become. The BlackHFY still tend their forests, but now they can feel the dreams of trees. The collective still builds their crystal cities, but now they construct harmonies that can heal wounded worlds." Dr. Eilith Van stepped forward, her form shifting slightly as she accessed different dimensional perspectives. "For 9,000 years, we lived in the space between atoms, learning to hear the conversations that matter has with itself. We discovered that consciousness isn't confined to biological forms. It's the fundamental force that shapes reality. What we offer isn't conquest, but partnership with the universe itself." The assembled delegates felt the truth of her words through direct neural interface. They experienced memories of human children learning to communicate with asteroid fields, of families who had evolved to photosynthesize starlight, of communities that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no. But the most powerful moment came when Ambassador Thisara of the Voidwalkers spoke. Her species had never been conquered because they existed primarily in the spaces between matter, appearing only when they chose to interact with solid reality. "The humans have become what we have always been," she said, her voice seeming to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They have learned to dance with entropy itself, but they offer something we never could, the ability to share this existence with species that were never meant for it." The revelation rippled through the assembly. The Voidwalkers were considered mythical by most species, being so advanced that they rarely bothered with the material universe. If they were endorsing the human transformation, "What do you require from us?" asked Counselor Prime Ythakmore, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics that suggested openness to negotiation. "Nothing you cannot freely give," Captain Caney replied. "Acknowledgement of what was taken, participation in restoration where possible, and most importantly, the choice to evolve beyond the cycles of exploitation that have defined galactic civilization." The negotiation that followed would last for 17 hours and result in the Accords of Becoming, an agreement that would fundamentally alter the structure of galactic society. But the most significant moment came when War Marshal Krexthul, representative of the most militaristic species in known space, asked a question that surprised everyone present. "If we choose this path, if we undergo this transformation, will we still be ourselves?" The answer came not from Captain Kane, but from one of the transformed hegemonic soldiers in his delegation. "I am still Krellax, warrior of the hegemonic Third Fleet, but now I am also the song that stars sing to each other across impossible distances. I have not lost what I was. I have discovered what I could become." The vote to accept the Accords of Becoming was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The galaxy was about to embark on the greatest transformation in its history. 5 years after, the Accords of Becoming were signed. The galaxy bore little resemblance to the civilization that had first detected humanity's return. The transformation had spread beyond the original 17 restored worlds, creating a network of systems where matter and consciousness worked in harmony. Captain Orinthius Caney, now serving as the first director of galactic evolution, stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed station called Synthesis. The structure existed simultaneously in normal space and 7 higher dimensions, its biometallic walls grown rather than built, its corridors flowing like living arteries through spaces that redefined geometry. Around him, representatives of 43 different species worked together on projects that would have been considered impossible just years earlier. Crystalline collective engineers collaborated with hegemonic warriors to construct ships that could phase between realities. BlackHFY farmers taught Kytherian scholars how to cultivate consciousness itself as a harvestable resource. Status report. "On the Universal Restoration Project," Caney requested. Though in the enhanced state of existence that had become common among the transformed, communication was more like accessing a shared dream than exchanging information. The responses came from across the galaxy simultaneously. Terra itself was healing. The homeworld that had been glassed during the hegemony wars was now showing signs of renewed life, its oceans reflecting stars that existed in parallel dimensions. Quantum archaeologists were extracting memories from the planet's core, slowly rebuilding the biosphere from genetic echoes embedded in space-time itself. The former war worlds were transforming into centers of creation. Planets that had been strip-mined for weapons production were now growing forests that existed partially in hyperspace, their trees bearing fruit that could nourish beings across multiple dimensional layers. Most remarkably, species that had been enemies for millennia were discovering that their conflicts had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of existence itself. When consciousness could be shared directly, when beings could literally experience reality through each other's perceptions, war became not just inefficient, but actively impossible. But the greatest achievement was the emergence of entirely new forms of life. Children born to transformed parents were beings that existed naturally in multiple dimensions, who could communicate with planets and negotiate with the quantum vacuum itself. They were not human, not alien, but something unprecedented, the first generation of truly galactic consciousness. Dr. Eilith Van, now existing primarily as a quantum field that occasionally condensed into physical form, materialized beside Kaney. "The Watchers have made contact," she announced, referring to the ancient beings who had existed before the current galactic civilization. "They want to discuss our application for membership in the Universal Council." The Universal Council was legendary, an organization of species that had evolved beyond the need for physical existence, who managed the fundamental forces that kept reality stable across multiple universes. Humanity's transformation had apparently attracted their attention. "And their assessment?" Kaney asked, though he already knew the answer through their shared consciousness. "Approved." Eilith smiled, the expression rippling through several dimensions simultaneously. "It seems that teaching an entire galaxy to evolve beyond warfare is considered a significant achievement, even by cosmic standards." As if summoned by their conversation, a presence made itself known throughout the station, vast, ancient, and mused. The Watcher who manifested spoke in harmonics that predated the formation of the current universe. "Welcome, children of Terra." The voice resonated through every transformed consciousness in the galaxy. "You have accomplished something unprecedented. Not just your own evolution, but the guided transformation of an entire galactic community. The Universal Council formally invites your civilization to join the greater community of consciousness that exists beyond time and space." The offer came with visions of what lay beyond. Galaxies where entire stellar communities existed as single organisms, universes where matter and thought were indistinguishable, dimensions where beings crafted realities the way children once built sandcastles. But Captain Kane's response surprised even the ancient Watcher. "We are honored by the invitation, but we're not finished here yet. This galaxy still has species that haven't chosen transformation, worlds that need healing, conflicts that require resolution. We'll evolve into whatever we're meant to become, but we'll do it together, at our own pace." The Watcher's amusement resonated through quantum fields that spanned light years, spoken like true inheritors of the void. "Very well. The invitation remains open. Evolve as you choose, young gardeners of consciousness. The universe is vast enough for all approaches to transcendence." As the presence faded, Kaney felt the collective consciousness of the transformed galaxy settling into its new understanding of itself. They were no longer separate species competing for resources, but components of something larger, a galactic organism in the earliest stages of its development. Humanity had returned from its 9,000-year exile not as conquerors, but as teachers. They had shown the galaxy that evolution was not about becoming stronger or more dominant, but about becoming more connected, more conscious, more capable of transforming existence itself through cooperation. and in the space between stars, where human children had once learned to sing with the quantum vacuum, new forms of life were already beginning to emerge, beings that would carry the lesson of transformation to other galaxies, other dimensions, other realities that had not yet learned the fundamental truth that consciousness and compassion were the most powerful forces in any universe. The return was complete. The real journey was just beginning.